He never talked about his past, never mentioned where he'd worked before the diner. Just a quiet man who knew everyone's coffee preferences and always had a warm smile. But that day when the faded tattoo on his arm caught a customer's attention, everyone discovered this ordinary waiter had once flown the most dangerous missions in American military history. Welcome to Duty Stories. Before we begin this incredible story of hidden service and unexpected revelation, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe every veteran story deserves to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter more than you know. The Sunrise Diner sat on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona, where Interstate 10 met the old desert highway. It was the kind of place that survived on coffee, comfort food, and the steady stream of truckers, travelers, and locals who needed a meal that reminded them of home. Mike Sullivan had been working there for 9 years, ever since he'd moved to Arizona from somewhere back east, though he never said exactly where. He was the kind of employee restaurant owners dream about. Punctual, reliable, and blessed with an almost supernatural ability to remember how every regular customer liked their coffee. Black, 2 sugars for Bill. Cream, no sugar for Mrs. Martinez. Half CAF with oat milk for the lawyer in booth 3. Mike never wrote anything down, never got an order wrong, and never seemed rattled, no matter how busy the breakfast rush became. At 54, Mike had the weathered look of someone who'd spent time outdoors, though his hands were soft from years of carrying plates and wiping tables. His hair was salt and pepper gray, always neatly combed, and he wore the same style of reading glasses that he'd push up his nose when calculating checks. The other staff liked him well enough. He was quiet but not unfriendly, helpful but not intrusive. He'd cover extra shifts without complaint, stayed late to help with inventory, and never participated in the gossip that inevitably swirled around any small workplace. Mike's like a priest, joked Carmen, the morning cook. He knows everyone's secrets, but never tells them. If Mike had secrets of his own, he kept them well hidden. He drove a modest Honda Civic, lived in a small apartment near the diner, and spent his free time reading paperback novels and watching old movies. The closest thing to a vice anyone had observed was his habit of stepping outside during breaks to stare up at the sky, especially when planes flew overhead. "You ever think about flying?" asked Jenny, one of the younger waitresses, during a slow afternoon shift. Mike had paused, watching a commercial airliner trace a white line across the desert sky. "Sometimes," he'd said simply, then returned to refilling salt shakers. The customers who frequented the Sunrise Diner came from all walks of life. There was Bill Henderson, retired mechanic, who came in every Tuesday for eggs over easy and black coffee. Mrs. Martinez, an elementary school teacher, who graded papers over lunch. Bob Garrett, a long-haul trucker who knew the menu by heart. And then there was Colonel James Patterson, United States Air Force, retired. Patterson had discovered the diner 6 months earlier while visiting his daughter at the University of Arizona. He'd been impressed by the food, but more impressed by the service. Mike had a way of anticipating needs, refilling coffee just as it ran low, bringing extra napkins without being asked, somehow knowing that Patterson preferred his bacon crispy without ever being told. "Best service I've had since the officers' club at Nellis," Patterson had told his daughter after that first visit. What Patterson didn't know was that Mike had been studying him from day one. The way Patterson sat, back straight, always facing the door. The way he folded his napkin precisely. The way his eyes automatically tracked movement around the restaurant. These were the habits of someone who'd spent years in situations where situational awareness meant survival. But it was Patterson's watch that had really caught Mike's attention. A government-issue Omega Speedmaster, the kind issued to military pilots. Patterson wore it with the casual confidence of someone who'd earned the right to display his service, but not the arrogance of someone who needed others to notice. On this particular Thursday morning in October, Patterson was sitting in his usual booth, reading a newspaper and working on his second cup of coffee. The morning rush had ended, and the diner had settled into its mid-morning quiet. Mike was clearing the adjacent table when Patterson's phone rang. "Colonel Patterson," he answered, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to command. Mike couldn't help but overhear pieces of the conversation. Something about an air show at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, a request for Patterson to participate in a memorial ceremony. "I appreciate the invitation," Patterson was saying, "but I'm not sure I'm the right person. There are pilots with much more distinguished records who should be recognized instead." Mike finished clearing the table and was about to move away when Patterson ended his call and looked up. "Everything all right, Colonel?" Mike asked, the military title coming naturally. Patterson seemed surprised that Mike had caught both his rank and his obvious distress. "You serve." "A lifetime ago," Mike replied carefully. "Which branch?" Mike hesitated for just a moment. "Air Force." Patterson studied Mike's face more carefully. There was something familiar about the man's bearing, something that went beyond simple military courtesy. "What did you do in the Air Force?" "Flew," Mike said simply, then immediately looked like he regretted saying even that much. Patterson's interest was fully engaged now. "What aircraft?" Mike glanced around the nearly empty diner, then sat down across from Patterson, something he'd never done in 6 months of serving the retired colonel. "F-16s, mostly. Some classified stuff I can't talk about." Patterson's eyebrows rose. F-16 pilots weren't casual weekend warriors. They were highly trained, highly skilled professionals who represented the elite of military aviation. "Where are you stationed?" "Nellis, Aviano, couple other places." Mike's answers were getting shorter, more guarded. Patterson was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he asked a question that would change everything. "What's your last name, Mike?" "Sullivan." Patterson's face went white. He stared at Mike for a long moment, his mind racing through memories from decades past. "Mike Sullivan," he repeated slowly, "as in Captain Michael Sullivan, call sign Ghost." Mike's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face, and for the first time since Patterson had known him, the unflappable waiter looked genuinely shaken. "I don't use that name anymore," Mike said quietly. But Patterson was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through photos with urgent purpose. He found what he was looking for and turned the screen toward Mike. It was a photograph from 1991, taken at an air base in Saudi Arabia during Operation Desert Storm. A group of F-16 pilots stood in front of their aircraft, young and confident in their flight suits. In the center of the group stood a pilot with captain's bars, his helmet tucked under his arm. The man in the photograph was unmistakably a younger version of Mike Sullivan. "Ghost Sullivan," Patterson whispered, "the pilot who single-handedly took out the radar installation at Al-Qaim, the mission they said was impossible." Mike was staring at the photograph, his hands trembling slightly. "Where did you get this?" "I was at Duran when you came back from that mission," Patterson said. "I was a lieutenant then, barely qualified to fly cargo runs. But everyone knew about Ghost Sullivan. You were a legend." Mike looked around the diner nervously, as if afraid someone might overhear. "Colonel, I'd appreciate it if you didn't." "Didn't what?" "Didn't tell people that one of the finest pilots in Air Force history is serving them coffee." Patterson's voice was filled with both respect and confusion. "Mike, what are you doing here?" The question hung in the air between them. Mike was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the desert landscape. "You know what happened after Desert Storm?" he finally asked. Patterson shook his head. "I kept flying. Black operations, mostly. The kind of missions where success means nobody ever knows you were there, and failure means—" Mike paused. "Well, failure was an option." He rolled up a sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo on his forearm, wings surrounding a skull, with dates that Patterson recognized as marking years of classified operations. 15 years of missions that don't exist, in places that aren't on any map, for reasons that will be classified long after we're both dead. Patterson stared at the tattoo, understanding beginning to dawn on him. Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. Sometimes I was providing air support for operations that officially never happened. Sometimes I was making sure certain facilities had accidents. Mike's voice was matter-of-fact, but Patterson could hear the weight behind the words. And then one day in 2003, I was flying cover for a rescue mission in Afghanistan. A unit of Rangers had been pinned down for 18 hours, taking heavy casualties. The weather was impossible, zero visibility, mountain winds that could tear apart an aircraft. Mike paused, his eyes distant with memory. My wingman took a hit during the first pass. Had to eject over hostile territory. The rescue mission became 2 rescue missions, and the weather was getting worse. Patterson waited. Sensing this was the heart of whatever had brought Mike Sullivan from an F-16 cockpit to a roadside diner. I made 6 passes through that valley, laying down cover fire, taking hits, burning fuel I didn't have. Got the Rangers out, got my wingman out, but during the last pass, Mike's voice broke slightly. There was a village nearby. Intelligence said it was empty, abandoned, but it wasn't. The weight of understanding settled on Patterson like a physical force. "How many?" he asked quietly. 12. Women and children who were sheltering in a building we thought was a weapons cache. The explosion. Mike closed his eyes. I can still see it. Patterson reached across the table and placed his hand on Mike's arm. "It wasn't your fault. In war, terrible things happen, and sometimes good people have to live with the consequences of impossible choices." That's what they told me at the inquiry. Clean shoot, they said. Intel failure, not pilot error. Recommended me for another commendation. Mike's laugh was bitter. A commendation for killing children. "What did you do?" "I resigned my commission the day I got back to base. Walked away from 22 years of service, a full pension, everything." Mike gestured around the diner, and I ended up here. Patterson was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what Mike had told him. "Why here? Why this?" "Because here, the worst thing that happens is someone's eggs get cold. Here, my mistakes don't cost lives. Here, I serve people instead of—" He trailed off. "Instead of carrying out orders that haunt you," Patterson finished. Mike nodded. "Every morning I come to work. I help people start their day with a good meal and friendly service. It's not much, but it's honest work that doesn't require me to make life-and-death decisions for other people." Patterson looked around the diner with new eyes. "And you've been doing this for 9 years. 9 years next month. 9 years of coffee refills and order taking and making sure Mrs. Martinez gets her usual table by the window. Do any of the other staff know?" Mike shook his head. "You're the first person I've told. I was hoping to keep it that way." Patterson studied Mike's face, seeing the genuine fear there. "Why did you tell me?" "Because you're asking the questions I've been afraid someone would ask for 9 years. And because—" Mike hesitated. "Because I recognized you too, Colonel. You were the pilot who led the escort mission that brought my wingman home after he ejected." Patterson's eyes widened. "That was you. The ghost mission over the Hindu Kush." "That was me. And you saved Lieutenant Rodriguez's life that day." The 2 men sat in silence, bound by shared memories of a war fought in shadows, of decisions made in impossible circumstances, of the weight that all warriors carry long after the battle's end. "Mike," Patterson said finally, "you know that what happened in Afghanistan doesn't diminish what you accomplished, right? The lives you saved, the missions you completed, the service you gave your country." Mike was quiet for a moment. "Tell that to the families of those 12 people." "I would if I could. And I'd tell them that the man responsible for their deaths has spent 9 years trying to make amends in the only way he knows how, by serving others with honor and humility." Mike looked up, surprised by the conviction in Patterson's voice. "That phone call I took earlier? They want me to speak at a memorial ceremony for pilots who died in classified operations. I was going to decline because I don't think I deserve the honor." Patterson reached into his wallet and pulled out a card. "But I think I know someone who does deserve recognition, even if he doesn't want it." Mike looked at the card. It was for the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base Historical Foundation. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Ghost Sullivan's story deserves to be remembered. Not the part about Afghanistan. That can stay between us. But the part about the impossible missions, the lives saved, the service given. Mike shook his head. I don't want recognition. I don't deserve it. Maybe not. But those Rangers you saved, they deserve to know that their rescue pilot is still serving, still making a difference in people's lives. Patterson stood up, leaving money on the table for his coffee. Think about it, Mike. Sometimes the most important service happens after we think our service is done. As Patterson reached the door, Mike called out to him, Colonel, what you said about good people living with the consequences of impossible choices. Patterson turned back. Does it ever get easier? Patterson was quiet for a moment. No, Mike, it doesn't get easier, but it gets different. You learn to carry the weight differently. After Patterson left, Mike stood alone in the quiet diner, staring at the business card. Carmen emerged from the kitchen, having watched the last part of the conversation with curiosity. Everything okay, Mike? You look like you've seen a ghost. Mike managed a small smile. Something like that. For the rest of his shift, Mike moved through his duties with mechanical precision, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the Rangers he'd saved, wondered if they were still alive, if they had families, if they ever thought about the pilot who'd risked everything to bring them home. He thought about Lieutenant Rodriguez, his wingman who'd ejected over hostile territory. Patterson had saved Rodriguez's life, but Mike had never learned what happened to him afterward. And he thought about the 12 people who had died because of his actions, and whether 9 years of serving coffee could ever balance that scale. That evening, after the diner closed, Mike drove to a hill overlooking the city. It was a place he came to sometimes when he needed to think, when the weight of his memories became too much to carry alone. He pulled out his phone and, after a long hesitation, called the number on Patterson's card. Davis-Monthan Historical Foundation. This is Sarah. This is Mike Sullivan. Colonel Patterson gave me your number. Oh yes, Mr. Sullivan. Colonel Patterson called and told us to expect your call. He said you might be interested in participating in our upcoming memorial ceremony. Mike was quiet for a moment. What would that involve? Well, we're honoring pilots who served in classified operations. It's not about revealing details. We understand the sensitive nature of that work. It's about acknowledging that some of our bravest service members can never be publicly recognized for their sacrifices. I see. Colonel Patterson mentioned that you might be willing to share some general thoughts about service, about the transition from military to civilian life. He said you had a unique perspective on continued service. Mike watched a commercial airliner trace its path across the evening sky, its navigation lights blinking steadily. When is the ceremony? Next Friday evening, 7 o'clock. Would you be available? Mike thought about his shift at the diner, about the routine that had defined his life for 9 years, about the safety of anonymity he'd built around himself. Yes, he said finally. I'll be there. The next morning, Mike arrived at the diner early, as he always did. But something was different. He moved with a purpose that his co-workers noticed immediately. You seem different today, observed Jenny during the breakfast rush. Lighter somehow. Mike smiled as he refilled her coffee pot. Maybe I am. When Colonel Patterson arrived for his usual Thursday morning coffee, he found Mike waiting with a fresh cup and a warm smile. I made the call, Mike said simply. Patterson's face lit up. I'm glad. How do you feel about it? Terrified, Mike admitted, but also relieved somehow. Like maybe it's time to stop hiding from who I used to be. You're not hiding, Mike. You've been serving in a different capacity. There's honor in what you do here. Mike looked around the diner, at the regular customers who had become like family, at the co-workers who had never asked about his past, but had accepted him as he was. You know what's funny? I came here thinking I was running away from my service, but I think I've been continuing it in a different form. Patterson nodded. Service takes many forms. Sometimes it's flying dangerous missions in hostile territory. Sometimes it's making sure Mrs. Martinez gets her usual table by the window. And sometimes, Mike added, it's learning to forgive yourself enough to honor the good you've done along with acknowledging the mistakes you've made. The memorial ceremony at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base was small but meaningful. About 50 people gathered in a hangar filled with historic aircraft, including several F-16s like the ones Mike had flown in his Air Force career. When it was Mike's turn to speak, he walked to the podium with the same quiet confidence he'd brought to everything he'd done for the past 9 years. "My name is Mike Sullivan," he began, his voice steady and clear. "For 22 years, I had the honor of serving as a pilot in the United States Air Force. For the past 9 years, I've had the honor of serving coffee at the Sunrise Diner on the outskirts of Tucson." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. People ask me why I left a distinguished military career to wait tables. The truth is, I didn't leave service. I just changed the uniform. Mike paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. Active duty airmen, veterans, family members of those being honored. In the Air Force, I learned that service means putting others before yourself, accomplishing the mission even when it's difficult, and carrying responsibility for your actions. Those lessons didn't stop applying when I took off the uniform. Every morning at the diner, I serve people who are starting their day, who need fuel for whatever challenges they're facing. I can't fly combat missions anymore, but I can make sure a trucker has good coffee for a long haul, or that a teacher gets a quiet place to grade papers, or that a retired colonel gets to feel welcomed and appreciated. Mike's voice grew stronger as he continued. The men and women we're honoring tonight understood that service doesn't end when the mission is over. It continues in how we treat our families, our communities, and the strangers we encounter every day. He looked directly at Patterson, who was sitting in the front row. Some of us carry the weight of difficult decisions, of missions that didn't go as planned, of consequences we never intended. But we also carry the memories of lives saved, missions accomplished, and service given freely in defense of something bigger than ourselves. Mike's voice softened. To the families of those we're honoring tonight, I want you to know that your loved ones' service mattered. They flew dangerous missions so that others could come home safely. They made difficult decisions so that others wouldn't have to. They carried burdens so that the rest of us could sleep peacefully. And to my fellow veterans who might be struggling with the transition from military to civilian life, I want you to know that your service didn't end when you left the military. It just took a different form. Whether you're teaching children, building houses, healing the sick, or serving coffee, you're still serving. Mike paused, his eyes growing misty. The greatest honor we can give to those we've lost is to continue living lives of service, to keep putting others first, to keep carrying the responsibility of making the world a little better than we found it. He stepped back from the podium to sustained applause, but what moved him most was seeing Colonel Patterson wiping tears from his eyes. After the ceremony, as people were mingling and sharing stories, a young airman approached Mike. "Mr. Sullivan, my name is Rodriguez, Technical Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez." Mike's eyes widened. "Rodriguez, are you related to Lieutenant Carlos Rodriguez?" "He's my father, sir. He told me to find you if I ever had the chance." Mike felt his knees go weak. "How is he? Your father?" "He's good, sir. Retired as a lieutenant colonel. He teaches at the Air Force Academy now." Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed Mike a recent photo. Carlos Rodriguez, older but unmistakably the young pilot Mike had served with, standing with his family at what looked like a graduation ceremony. "He wanted me to give you this," Rodriguez said, handing Mike a small wrapped package. Inside was a challenge coin, not an official military coin, but one that had been custom-made. On one side was the F-16 Fighting Falcon. On the other side were simple words. "Ghost, thank you for bringing me home. Always your wingman, Carlos." Mike stared at the coin, overwhelmed by emotion. "He talks about you sometimes," Rodriguez continued, "about the pilot who wouldn't leave anyone behind, no matter how dangerous it got." "Your father was a good pilot and a good man," Mike managed to say. "He says the same about you, sir. He also said to tell you that he forgives you for whatever you think you need forgiveness for, and that he hopes you can forgive yourself." Mike looked up sharply. "He said that?" Rodriguez nodded. "He said you'd understand what he meant." That night, Mike drove back to his hill overlooking Tucson. But this time, he wasn't carrying the weight of his memories alone. He was carrying the words of forgiveness from a friend, the knowledge that his service had mattered, and the understanding that redemption doesn't come from hiding from your past. It comes from using your past to serve others better. When he returned to work at the Sunrise Diner the next morning, Mike was still the same quiet, professional waiter he'd always been. But now, when he served coffee to a veteran, he might share a quiet word of understanding. When he saw someone struggling, he made a point of offering a little extra kindness. And when planes flew overhead, instead of just watching them with longing, Mike would remember that he too had served with honor, had made a difference, and was still making a difference in the only way he knew how. Colonel Patterson continued to be a regular customer, and their conversations gradually shifted from the weight of the past to the possibilities of the future. Patterson eventually convinced Mike to start speaking at veterans groups, sharing his story of transition and continued service. Mrs. Martinez still got her usual table by the window. Bill Henderson still ordered eggs over easy and black coffee. The truckers still knew they could count on Mike to remember how they liked their coffee. But now they also knew, thanks to Patterson's gentle sharing of Mike's story, that they were being served by someone who had once flown the most dangerous missions in American military history, and who had chosen to continue serving in a different way. Some customers left a little extra tip. Others simply said thank you with more meaning than before. A few veterans opened up about their own struggles with transition and service, and Mike Sullivan, call sign Ghost, learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in the sky, but in the quiet moments when you choose to keep serving others, even when no one will ever know the full extent of what you've sacrificed. 6 months later, a small plaque appeared near the cash register at the Sunrise Diner. It read, "In honor of all veterans who continue to serve in civilian life, your service matters, your sacrifice is remembered, and your continued dedication makes our community stronger." Mike never asked to put it there, but he suspected Colonel Patterson had something to do with it, because sometimes the most important recognition comes not from medals or ceremonies, but from the quiet acknowledgement that service takes many forms, and that all of them matter. So I ask you, have you ever encountered someone whose quiet service made a difference in your life? Someone who turned out to be carrying a story of sacrifice and service you never expected? Share their memory in the comments, because here at Duty Stories, we believe every form of service deserves recognition. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe to help us honor those who continue serving long after they've taken off the uniform. And remember, the next time someone serves you with unusual care and professionalism, take a moment to appreciate that they might be carrying a story of service you can't imagine. Until next time, treat every act of service with the respect it deserves, because sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is keep serving others, one cup of coffee at a time.